Okay, let's see. Yeah, it seems like it's okay. Okay, we're back with part four. Um, I went back a little bit because he's going to talk about Grant. And he said he was a terrible president or something like that. I'm going to do some defending on this one. Before we get started, thumbs up, subscribe, donate to the channel if you'd like through the thanks button. Request a video. You sponsoring that video.
It continues to be a disaster. It was 8 years of drunk.
All right, right off the bat. There's no evidence that he drank during his presidency. If you're saying the presidency was a disaster because of the people that he had, okay, you can judge that because those people, they use the office of the presidency for their own devices and money-making schemes and stuff like that. He himself did not. He just trusted people too much. But there's no evidence that he was drinking while he was president. Now, there is evidence that they would have gatherings and he might have a little sip. He was not a major, like, oh, just keep pounding alcohol. He was a very lightweight. He was not someone who was going to drink a lot. He drank a little bit and then would pass out.
He was just drunk the whole time. He surrounded himself with the worst people. He stayed drunk. All the people he surrounded himself with were corrupt. He's the first and I believe the only president to kill somebody while in the White House. Drunk driving accident. 8 years before the car was invented.
I didn't think he killed anyone. I know he was the first one to get a ticket, speeding ticket, racing his horse. I don't think he killed anyone. Okay. I asked, did Ulysses S. Grant kill anyone while president? No. Ulysses S. Grant did not kill anyone as president, but he did have an encounter with a man who wanted to kill President James A. Garfield. So, yeah, no. He did not kill anyone.
It was a horse and buggy drunk driving accident. Like, he's flying down Pennsylvania Avenue. It also makes you wonder what was going on with the guy that got hit. Is that the president?
I don't know where he's getting this information from because this is wrong.
We're so done with Grant by the time his 8 years are over, we're not even going to allow a Republican to replace him.
Grant did a lot. He created the Justice Department. He went after the Ku Klux Klan in the South, the first iteration, which was some call the worst account. And this is not my words, but the first iteration of the Klan killed white people as well as black people. And Grant and all those people thought, oh, we can't have them killing, because the white people they killed were Northerners who moved down to the South to help the slaves. And Grant and all those people were like, oh, no, we can't have them killing whiteys. So they went down, and what they would do is they would arrest someone who then would turn on somebody, who 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 would turn on somebody, and they just arrest them all. Later on, they started to wear the hoods. I believe that was the second iteration. But the Klan got wiped out for almost 40 years after Grant left office. So they were like, all right, look, we're going to lick our wounds. We're going to figure out something, and then we'll come back.
Thinking the Republican Party had...
And by the way, Rutherford B. Hayes was the next president. Was he a Democrat? I don't remember.
We own Congress.
Okay, I had to double check. Hayes was a Republican. Grant's the 18th president. Hayes is the 19th president, although Tilden was the Democratic nominee who should have won. But Hayes ends up taking it by one electoral vote.
We're the heroes of the day. We saved the Union. The Democrats weren't quite as loyal, so they're tarnished. So, of course, the Republican Party will stay in charge for all eternity. We had 2 elections after Lincoln's assassination. Grant won both. And the 3rd election, a Democrat named Tilden wins. So the only way the Republicans can recover from that is cheat. So that's what they did. When you send your electors for your state, right, the party that won the state should send the electors. The Republicans from Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida also sent their electors. That's not a crisis. Lock the door and keep them out. They're not supposed to be there. The Democrats won those 3 states, but the Republicans who own Congress don't want Tilden to win. They want Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, to win. So what do? They pretend there's a crisis when there isn't one. They could literally arrest the Republicans and drag them out of the room. They're not going to do that because they want the crisis. And then they go, we don't know how to solve the crisis. Hayes solves the crisis by going to the Democratic delegates and makes a deal with them that he will make sure Reconstruction ends so that the South can begin Jim Crow if the delegates from those 3 states, those Democrats, just go home, so that all that's left are the Republicans. And that's how he wins the election, by 1 electoral college delegate. So they cheat in the most egregious way. It's not the first cheating election, but it's definitely the biggest cheat election that we've had. And then they continue to produce lackluster. Chester Alan Arthur, James Garfield. So don't get me wrong, Garfield was brilliant, so we shot him to death. So that's that. We don't usually like brilliant. We try to shoot them. Sometimes we shoot idiots. We've killed 5 of our presidents. We poisoned 1 and shot 4 to death. And then we've shot a bunch of other ones, like we shot Reagan, we shot Theodore Roosevelt. We shot at Gerald Ford 3 times. Like, who wants to kill that guy? He's like a teddy bear. He didn't do anything. He didn't even want to be president. He wanted to be Speaker of the House. He never was. He's just stuck being president. He's like, I just want to be Speaker. And then people are shooting.
Yeah, Rutherford B. Hayes is unremarkable. James Garfield was the what-if president. Interesting little story. We're going to go into story time if you'd like. You don't have to listen. I'll do this, and then you just fast forward to my hands waving, and we'll play the video. So in I think it was 1880. We're going to say 1880. There was a man, a Republican from Ohio, named John Sherman. He was a member of Congress, beloved in his state. He was might have been a former general in the Civil War, and was wounded, went back to Ohio. I'm going to call. Excuse me. Well, went back to Ohio, served, was known, got himself up, and then decided he had presidential aspirations. He was going to run, but back in those days, when you went to run, you didn't. So you wanted to be president, but you didn't want to tell people that you wanted to be president. So you had like you would tell your friend, do you think I should be president? Yeah, you should be. Do you want to go give a speech for me? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I'll write it for you. Here, I pre-written it 3 weeks ago. That was, you prepared by not preparing. The conference, the Republican nomination convention, that's the word, was happening in Chicago that year. And John Sherman tapped his lawyer friend, who was also in the Civil War and was a general, taps on him, who he was a member of Congress, Senate, I don't remember, but he resigned or refused, didn't run again, and went back to his law profession, because that's where he made money. And so John Sherman taps this guy who's his friend, and he goes, will you give a speech? And the guy goes, absolutely. Guy goes to Chicago, gets up, says, I'm going to nominate John Sherman, and gives this fiery speech. Crowd goes crazy. They go bonkers. So the nomination time comes around and everybody's voting. John Sherman is like leading these votes, but he's never hitting that threshold of 50%. He's close. I think he got up to 46%. Never gets the threshold of 50. 39 votes are cast. Hours go by. The head people get together. They're like, listen, we have to do something else because John Sherman's just not pulling it. Nobody is jumping over to get him over that ledge. So we got to nominate someone else. Let's nominate other people and see what happens. Somebody says, what about that guy who gave the speech for Sherman? We all know him. We know him from Congress. We know him because of his reputation as a general in the Civil War. Why not him? So they throw that guy's name out there. Boom. The 40th vote, that guy's name's out there. By the 46th vote, that man, James Garfield, gets the nomination. Now, John Sherman finds this out. Finds out that the guy who went to the convention to give his nomination and then a fiery speech eventually is the one who gets the nomination. John Sherman, not upset at all. That's his friend. He's happy for him. And he goes out and he campaigns for him. He then talks to other Republicans and they say, look, you're not the name your brother is. You need a name. You need to break away from him. So John Sherman tries to run for president 2 more times. That never gets any closer than what he was. In fact, he gets a little further away. We done? In the 1890s, John Sherman decides he wants to be his own person. And he ends up writing the John Sherman, minus John Sherman writes the Sherman antitrust law, which goes after big companies, which is used against the oil companies and maybe, any kind of monopoly situation. He finally gets his name. And when asked, are you going to run for president? He's like, no. And somebody said, we no longer view you as the brother of William Tecumseh Sherman, the Civil War Union general. The South does not like him, but we no longer view you as his brother. You are now your own man. Just a little interesting story. And that's fascinating to me.
And I'm in Times Square, ducking. He's the first president that was photographed while in a bathing suit in a swimming pool. So it was bad, because the journalists are over him, looking down. It was just bad photo op. He's also, I believe, the first president to be filmed falling out of an airplane, but not wearing a parachute. He was going down the stairs, but without the bottom of his feet on the stairs. It was like his back on the stairs. If you're the camera person, like, oh, look, a plane is landing. Nope, they just followed him down.
I think he slips.
Look, the president's going down the stairs the wrong way. I feel like that was mean. So we get into this zone where we have one corrupt, uninteresting, incompetent president after another. They're all party hacks. They've all worked their way up through the party machinery. And then something weird happens. Grover Cleveland, a Democrat, wins in a period where the Republicans were so keen on holding on to power, they were willing to cheat. Like in 1876, Grover Cleveland wins as a Democrat, serves his 4-year term. He then wins again, but only the popular vote. He loses the Electoral College. So Benjamin Harrison, the grandson of William Henry Harrison, ends up becoming the president. A depression breaks out. It's our third worst depression in our history. It's called the Depression. So the Great Depression, don't call that the Depression, that's the Great Depression. That's why we threw an adjective in front of it, because he was like, this is so much worse than the other one. I know, we'll call this one the Great One. I would have thought like the awful, the miserable, the much worse. Sometimes I wonder about the adjective choices that we throw at things, you know. So the Depression breaks out in 1890. The economy's tanking. People are losing their jobs. They're miserable. A coalition forms of liberals, socialists, and evangelical Christians, and they vote for Grover Cleveland, and they give him a second term. He's the only president to have a sandwich, right? He did a Benjamin.
Not anymore. Now he's Trump's on there. I'm glitching again. Going slow. Trump also has that now.
Harrison sandwich. So as a kid, I've always been obsessed with politics and history. I was in 4th grade, and I decided I was going to memorize the presidents. Reagan was president, so I've aged myself now, you know. So he was number 40, and I knew he was number 40 because everybody kept saying number 40, like it was a magical number. Like, who cares it's number 40? 42 is a magical number. Everybody knows 42 is a better number. And then you realize it's Clinton, and you're like, why couldn't it have been like Roosevelt? Which one? I don't care. Just pick one. So I thought, okay, 40, perfect. I'll memorize it in either 4 groups of 10 or 10 groups of 4. So I counted it up, and then I got 39 presidents. And I counted it like 6 times, got 39 each time, went to my teacher, showed her. She's like, there must be something wrong with your book, because I had a book that had all the presidents in it. And I'm like, how could there be something wrong? Did somebody get forgotten? And she didn't know. And I said, I dumped it. I decided not to do it because it was just too irritating. And then later I realized Grover Cleveland gets counted twice because of the sandwich, the Benjamin Harris. Only I knew. Anyway, the reason Grover Cleveland matters is because Grover Cleveland makes a really important decision. The reason the voters voted for Grover Cleveland is they were done with the Republican Party again. They were done in 1876. They're done again here in 1892. 16 years later, they've decided we really want these guys gone, in part because of the Depression. And so he ran on a ticket where he promised things. So for example, we were going to switch the dollar to silver backing instead of gold backing. The thinking was it would allow for more currency to be in circulation, and people thought that would ease some of the suffering that the Depression had caused. Once he got into office, he immediately refused to do any of his campaign promises. And instead of going after the Republican Party and dumping them from power and replacing them with his Democrats, he did everything he could to uphold and keep the Republicans in place, even though he was a Democrat. And so in this really weird twist, he betrays his voters, he betrays his party. He's replaced by William McKinley. McKinley has it in his mind that McKinley is going to do something amazing and unusual. If you look at the first 7 presidents, there were 5 Southerners, 2 Yankees. The 5 Southerners each got a second term. So the first 7 presidents, you were likely going to get 2 terms. They all served 8 years, the 5 Southerners. The 2 Yankees were each 1-term presidents.
Adams.
And one of them was never even elected. So that was, of course, John Quincy Adams.
John Quincy Adams lost the popular and the electoral to Andrew Jackson. But Andrew Jackson did not win the threshold to be president. So as a trade-off, which is written in our Constitution, which is stupid, the trade-off is that it goes to the Congress, the states. And Henry Clay, who had run, lost, which is a theme in Henry Clay's life, to run for president and lose, didn't like Jackson. He threw his power and support behind John Quincy, and John Quincy thanked him by putting him in his cabinet. So that was another corrupt deal. John Quincy won Rightfully so, no. But he did win. And our rules say if you don't win the electoral vote, or the popular vote, doesn't really matter, the electoral college, you don't hit that threshold, then we have ways of determining the outcome. And that went down one of those paths of determining the outcome. Unfortunately, it's a bad deal for Jackson, but it doesn't make him an illegitimate president because he still got it, even though it went down the road that might not have been appreciated.
John Quincy Adams came in second place on popular vote and electoral college delegates, right? So, you're thinking, oh, he means like Trump. No, Trump still got first place in electoral college delegates, even though he came in second for popular vote. John Quincy Adams came in second for both. What happened was Jackson didn't win a majority. This was not the first election that nobody had won a majority, but the people that were backing John Quincy Adams were the people who didn't want commoners in politics. Andrew Jackson wasn't a true commoner. He was rich, but he was seen as a commoner. He wore a trench coat. He carried pistols on a holster on his hips. Like he cussed.
He was a military guy. He was a judge, lawyer. He wasn't a commoner. What he was dangerous because he wasn't a commoner. He was dangerous to them because he was a guy who went from South Carolina, North Carolina, the Waxhaw area, and then moved out to Tennessee. He was a guy who did his own thing, had killed, and these politicians looked at him as a potential dictator based off of what he had done during the War of 1812. Rightfully so, not rightfully so, doesn't matter. They had their opinions on him, and when it kicks to the states or the Congress and they get to decide, it's not going to be the outcome you like, but that is the law of the land that we allow to happen.
He was looked.
And I'm a Jackson fan. Jackson's presidency, I'm not a fan of. He wasn't a good president. His life, there's a fascinating life. He was a psychopath in a fun way and a dangerous way. But I love reading about his life. And he's crazy. Did he get screwed over? Absolutely he did. Did he make up for it with a great presidency? Absolutely not. No. John Quincy Adams had great ideas, didn't get things done. John Quincy Adams wanted to open up waterways for better transport and better trade and everything. And Congress was like, no, we're not. Who's paying for that? It's like,
Dad as a commoner. He didn't do the curly wig with the pink ponytail, the pink ribbon ponytail. He didn't wear knickers. He wore pants. He wore boots instead of.
James Monroe was the fifth president. He was the last one who kind of wore that because he was of the founding father age. These new guys didn't do that. Fashion changes with time.
Those fancy shoes. He was seen as a commoner. So the elites basically invoked the fact that the Constitution says you have to win a majority of electoral college delegates, and they then took it to the House, and then they rigged the election to make it so that John Quincy Adams would be the president in the House. And that's how he became president. So really, when you think about it, out of the first 7 presidents, only 6 of them were legitimately elected, and the 2 Yankees didn't get second terms.
He was legitimately elected.
So after Jackson, nobody got a second term. Well, almost nobody. 3 people got a second term after Jackson.
There was also an agreement by some of the people through Henry Clay. This country has been run by Virginians, 4 of them. Washington at 1, Jefferson at 3, James Madison at 4, James Monroe at 5. You have 8 years apiece. You have 32 years here. 32 years. The country is 40 years. That's after 6 presidents. So this is going into Jackson's time. You have 40 years, 32 years have been dominated by a Virginian. People were like, there are other states. We want more representation. And so Henry Clay, I lost track. Henry Clay comes along. He's already lost. He lost to Quincy Adams, lost to Andrew Jackson. Didn't throw his. Did he run against Martin Van Buren? I don't remember. Didn't run for William Henry Harrison. The Whigs nominated someone different, and they won. But Henry Clay had a compact with a bunch of people. If you run, pledge you'll only need 4 years. That way, the country isn't controlled and determined to be one way or one state. And so a lot of these people did it. People like Polk, he agreed to this pledge. Jackson told him don't do that. Polk agreed with it. Polk would have died. He died 3 months out of his office, so he probably would have died in office. I don't know if Zachary Taylor agreed to it, because Zachary Taylor died a year and a half into his term. Millard Fillmore, nobody really cares if he agreed with it or not. But a lot of these guys did agree with it. And so it was a way to, I think, for Clay to try to get his own way and get in for 4 years. And then Clay probably would have thought, well, let's see how good I do, and maybe I'll run for another term.
Right, Lincoln, but then he gets shot to death 1 month into his second term, so that's not a good role model. You don't want to go that way. Grant, but he's drunk the whole time and miserable and corrupt, and everybody thinks he's terrible.
He's not corrupt. There's no evidence that he was ever corrupt. None. No evidence that he was a drinker during his term. It didn't affect him. He didn't participate. Did he have corrupt people in his cabinet? Yes. Did he know they were corrupt when he hired him? No. He came from the school of the military, where what he said went. Unfortunately, that's not how it goes in the presidency. You don't make those decisions and people have to follow through with them, or you can execute them. That's not how it works. Tarnishing Grant annoys me.
So that's why we put him on the $50 bill. And then Grover Cleveland, but he does a term, then does a term. That's not a good role model either. You want to just keep going. So what McKinley wants to do is pull an Andrew.
Grover Cleveland didn't exactly set out to do a term and then not do a term. He got defeated by Benjamin Harrison. I don't know enough about Grover Cleveland. I do have a book on him. I'm reading about Benjamin Harrison. I'm on volume 2 of 3, and I'm only about 150 pages in. But Benjamin Harrison just had better ideas. And then, unfortunately, Benjamin Harrison, near the end, it was probably a toss-up. His wife passes away. Maybe 3 months. It could have been 3 weeks before the election. And he pretty much was done. He didn't care. He postponed any type of campaigning. He postponed He postponed campaigning. And out of respect, Grover Cleveland did the same. But by then, people were just kind of like, we're done with that.
Jackson. He wants to do 2 good, solid terms back to back with genocide. I know you're thinking, including the genocide? Yes, Filipinos. He wanted to slaughter the Philippines and make it Christian. And you're thinking, wait, wasn't it like 80% Catholic? Yeah.
Who was he talking about?
He wanted Christian. Yeah, terms back to back. And Andrew Jackson. He wanted Cleveland, but he does a term. And then Grover Cleveland, but he does a term, then does a term. That's not a good role model either. You want to just keep going. So what McKinley wants to do is pull an Andrew Jackson. He wants to do 2 good, solid terms back to back with genocide. I know you're thinking, including the genocide? Yes, Filipinos. He wanted to slaughter the Philippines and make it Christian. And you're thinking, wait, wasn't it like 80% Catholic? Yeah. He wants to make it Protestant. I said Christian. It always freaks me out when people are like, I'm Christian, and what they mean is I'm Protestant, and they don't mean Catholics. Like, what do you think Catholics are? Do you know that there are Orthodox Christians too? What are they? That'd be fun. Fun conversation. So, McKinley wants to pull an Andrew Jackson, genocide and all, and do 2 back-to-back good, solid, powerful terms. He makes Theodore Roosevelt his running mate because he's figuring he's popular enough, he'll pull the ticket forward. He gets elected, and it turns out he pulled a Lincoln, and he's shot to death shortly after his inauguration. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, Theodore Roosevelt is president. It was the assumption in American politics that if you became vice president, that was it. You were done. That the only path to becoming president was if your president died. Vice presidents didn't get elected presidents. I'm doing past tense because that's obviously changed in recent years. So think about it. John Adams, our second president, was a vice president, right? So there's that. And I'm going to ignore all the guys that their president died, right? So no, Tyler, we're not talking about those guys. I just want to focus on the guys who they got elected. Martin Van Buren, the 8th president.
Jefferson. Jefferson was John Adams' vice president. Madison, no. James Monroe, no. He was Secretary of War. Back then, Secretary of War got you more because people looked at it as you were protecting. Why did this light just shut off? Thank you. Martin Van Buren, yeah. Can't judge John Tyler. Zachary Taylor. John Tyler's 10, Zachary Taylor 11. He dies in office. Millard Fillmore can't trust him. Can't count him. I'm sorry, John Tyler was 10. Polk was 11. Then Zachary Taylor was 12. He dies. Millard Fillmore 13. 14 was Franklin Pierce. 15 was James Buchanan. 16, Lincoln dies. 17, Andrew Johnson. You can't count him. 18, Grant. 19, Rutherford B. Hayes. 20, James Garfield gets assassinated and Chester A. Arthur takes over. I mean, I can go down the line and tell you that Reagan's vice president, George H.W. Bush, made it. Can't count FDR dying and Truman taking over. Now, no, that one doesn't count. Dwight Eisenhower's vice president was Richard Nixon. I'm looking at the books trying to I was going to do this, but Nixon lost to Kennedy, but then LBJ takes over. Then Nixon gets it. So he was not the vice president at the time. I'm sure I'm going to miss some more, but we'll go back to him. It's not about me, sorry.
And then that was it. That was it until Nixon. But then Nixon had 8 years in between being vice president and becoming president. So even then it was kind of not a direct thing.
And Reagan had 8 years, and then George H.W. Bush takes over. Reagan was 40. George H.W. Bush was 41. No new taxes. He loses. Clinton takes over. Gore loses to George W. Bush. Bush had Cheney. Cheney had no interest in presidency. Biden got 4 years after Trump. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a given. And you know what's Adams, Jefferson, Van Buren, Bush. Wow, we've had more vice presidents taking over by death than by nomination or voting in. I'm sorry. Have I already forgot one?
The time we got a direct one was George Herbert Walker Bush, George Bush Sr. He's the first direct since Martin Van Buren. So number 41 after number 8, there was a huge span of time where becoming vice president usually meant the end of your career. So when Roosevelt becomes president at age 42, our youngest ever president, JFK was 43 when he was elected, so Roosevelt was a little bit younger. He has a problem because he was also not picked because of his position in the party. So I'm going to reveal something to you. Presidents don't just get institutional power when they become president. In other words, becoming president does give you some power, but just by virtue of the fact that people are now stuck calling you Mr. President, right? And then you're like, oh, someday, Ms. Whatever. I've given up. Actually, if Biden gets elected for a second term, I think it's very likely we're going to be seeing President Harris, because I don't see Biden making it another 4 years.
4 months ago. Okay. It is accurate.
That would be a real shocker. By virtue of being called Mr. President, you do get some power. But the reality is most presidents come in with a lot of power. In other words, they had some kind of power base. In other words, you can't just jump into politics. You have to jump into politics with something. So my representative, when she decided she was going to run, my Texas rep, when she decided she was going to run, yard signs immediately popped up in my neighborhood with her name all over it. And you knew in that instant she was going to win. And the reason is she was going into the race as a realtor who had sold everybody their house that they were madly in love with. And then she joined the PTA and got into the schools and fought for everybody's kids. And so the neighborhood knew who she was by her name. And, you know, like, she's in my neighborhood to the point where my kids have trick-or-treated her home. I'm Facebook friends with her. You know what I mean? Like, it's that. So that when she launched her campaign, she had this base of support that was unstoppable, and she defeated her Republican opponent and won the district. In other words, you need power to get power. You need money to make money. It's that. So Roosevelt's in trouble because the dominant power at the time for the presidency was your position in your political party. And Roosevelt had political posts. He had been governor of New York. He had been part of the Department of the Navy. Like, he wasn't a complete outsider in the Republican Party. He just wasn't working his way up the ranks. He wasn't rolling up his sleeves and doing the hard, gritty work that you need to if you have real political ambition. He was taking kind of the rich kids' pathway and sort of cheating the system. And now all of a sudden he's president. A normal human being in those circumstances would have gone, how do I get power? The political party is my power base. I'll just resort to it and try and work my way up. That's what you would do, a normal person. Roosevelt thinks about it, realizes if he does that, if that becomes his path, he's going to spend his 4 years as president trying to work his way into a position of power in the political party. He's not going to get a second term, in part because he will have done nothing interesting that the public knows about, and in part because nobody gets second terms in this time period except for the list I gave you earlier, and 2 of those guys get murdered. And so people are starting to think, maybe I don't want a second term.
Roosevelt was put into the vice presidency on McKinley's second term because he ran a police force, rooted out corruption, was a cowboy in the West for a little bit. He didn't take bribes. when you're working in a political system that you got to pay to grease the wheels kind of thing, and he's a guy who says, nope, and if I see you do it, I'll take you down. People didn't like him. How can we run him up the chain of command to a position that is powerful, and also we don't have to deal with him? You run him up, you get him into the vice presidency. The only thing that could ruin that is if someone during McKinley's re-election campaign, McKinley didn't, it was his front door. You came to his house to hear him talk. And somebody decided not that they wanted Roosevelt in office. They just didn't want him. They just didn't want McKinley. So they killed him. All those political people immediately thought, oh, crap. We hoisted him up the chain of power to a position where he was virtually powerless unless the worst thing could have happened just happened.
Maybe there's like a limit in the American public. If they accidentally elect you for the second term, they're so keen on making the limit, they'll just shoot you. So Roosevelt decides to do something else instead. He realizes something really interesting, that McKinley's term as president was our debutante ball. We went to war with Spain. Now, Spain kept trying to surrender, and we kept saying, no, you're going to dance. And the Spanish are like, we don't want to dance, we're going to lose, what's the point? And then we're like, because if we don't get to shoot Grandpa, nobody will take us seriously, right? Because England is dad, Spain is Grandpa. And so we put Spain down in a really ugly affair, and we basically conquer Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. By the way, the Filipinos showed up with Filipino flags, and they're like waving them in the streets with American flags. And we're like, what's with the Filipino flags? And they go, because you just liberated us. And we go, what? No, we conquered you. You're now part of the United States. And for 15 years, they disagreed with us. But we did our first Vietnam there, and we murdered hundreds of thousands of Filipinos. The low numbers, we killed 800,000. The high numbers, we killed 2 million. We were literally going from village to village massacring them.
I believe that was Arthur MacArthur that was in charge of doing all that. Arthur MacArthur, I've said his name before, fought in the Civil War at the Battle of Chickamauga. I think both times. First time, he was in the Union. First time got defeated. Second time was under Grant. And Sherman was there, and they charged up the mountain, and they ended up winning. Went on to have a son named Douglas MacArthur, who was in the Asian Pacific region during World War II for Japan's just brutal assaults that was going on there.
I don't know about you and your life experiences. I'm gonna go totally biased stereotype right here. I have never met a group of people kinder than Filipinos. Like, I can't imagine wanting to genocide Filipinos. Now, part of it is that when I was a kid, Arnie Cruz was a friend of mine. He was Filipino, and I am biased. I'm admitting it, but it's just weird to me. Anyway, that's what we did. We butchered them and made them submit, and they did eventually. So it was like the Vietnam we won. So that's cool. And then we needed them in World War II, so we said, all right, look, if you'll help us, we promise we'll let you vote on your fate after World War II. And weird, they voted for independence, so weird. Don't worry, we've plundered the Philippines. They were a rich colony when we conquered them. When we let them go, they were very poor. So in case you were worried, like, did we let that one get away? No, of course not. We're good at this. We're not noobs. We did it to ourselves first, and then we did it to the rest of the world. It's like our thing. Masters. So, Roosevelt realizes something. He can generate prestige from foreign affairs. He can leverage the kind of the big production events. He can make himself into a public figure every time the United States wins on the foreign stage. And once he realizes this, he realizes he can leverage the American public against the Republican Party. And then he doesn't need to be part of the Republican apparatus. He can go his own way. And he begins to get one international relations victory after the other. He stacks them up. He eventually wins the Nobel Peace Prize. Like, he really does some crazy stuff. He gets shot. An assassin walks up to him, shoots him, not point blank, but really close. It just so happened that Roosevelt had a speech in his vest pocket folded up. So when the bullet is going through the speech, it slows down just enough. It got lodged in his ribs. And so at that point, his aides are running up to take him to go to the hospital. And he goes, no, these people came here to hear a speech. They're going to hear it. He pulls out the speech and he reads the speech off to them.
It was almost a 2-hour speech as he was bleeding. Everyone around witnessed it. They all heard the gunshot. They saw the blood, his shirt just covered in blood, and he just continued with the speech until finally telling them, well, as you can see, I should probably go to the hospital. Yeah, probably.
Who does that? And then he does something really strange. So for the record, full disclosure, 8 of the 15 years we're genociding the Filipinos, that's Roosevelt. So I don't want you going, oh my God, he's my hero. But that doesn't mean he didn't do some cool, heroic things in between genocide. One of the things that he does that's mind-blowing is he goes after the big corporations.
Using the Sherman Antitrust Act.
He goes after Standard Oil. He destroys it. He chops it up into 7 little corporations. Rockefeller hated his guts. He goes after the meatpacking industry. You name it, he went after you if you were a big corporation. The Republican Party is the big corporation party. It was born that way. It was finance and corporate money attached to abolitionists. That was the idea. You'd get the numbers from the abolitionists and the money from the financiers and the corporate leaders, and you'd make a money party. And here's Roosevelt going after the money, and the Republican Party's like, what are you doing? That's our base. Why are you messing with this? And he's like, because they're breaking the law. The Sherman Antitrust Act, for example, they're in violation of the law. I'm the president. So he goes so rogue, he attacks his own party's base, and he gets away with it. And then he makes a terrible mistake, and he handpicks Taft to be his successor. Taft wins. He hates Taft's guts by the time the 4 years are over, so he decides to run against him as the Bull Moose Party candidate. His hope is to win a 3rd term, but he would have been happy if he could prevent Taft from getting a 2nd term. And Wilson gets 1st place, Roosevelt gets 2nd place, Taft comes in 3rd, and he takes Taft out. Wilson becomes president.
I'm going to stop it at Wilson becomes president. Taft may not have achieved a lot as the president, but something that Taft should be credited with is he never cared about the presidency. He was a lawyer. Presidency was cool, but he later on in life got what he ultimately always wanted, and that was to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So this is a man who served as the presidency, highest in terms of the 3, I almost said pillars, the 3 things of the government, 3 branches of government. Wow. He was a president, so he's executive, and then he was in the Supreme Court as Chief Justice. Whether you like him or not, that's a man who served his country. So I'm going to end this here, and we will be back with part 5. I got some dogs that have to go Outside. I can't say it. Potty. So until next time, have a good day, have a good night.